Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and this is Mordheim, City of the Damned, in my opinion one of the best Warhammer video games to have ever released. Which is of course quite the statement considering that the majority of Warhammer games, well yeah, let's not talk about those Warhammer games, shall we? So in a sea of garbage, what makes Mordheim so special? Well, as you can imagine, it's based on Mordheim, a minigame in the Warhammer Fantasy universe which didn't cost you an arm and a leg to actually play. While it's been discontinued officially for the longest time, the fanbase still play it very much worldwide, and obviously the developers, Rogue Factor, wanted to take advantage of that. Now, of course, Mordheim the video game has its flaws, yet it still has a lot of things that make it truly special, and we're going to talk about everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So let's not waste any more time and jump right in. There are 6 playable factions for base game and 2 locked behind a DLC paywall. The 4 base game ones can be found in the middle of the screen. Those are the Human Mercenaries, the Sisters of Sigmar, the Chaos Cultists, and of course the Skaven, with the 2 DLC ones being the Witch Hunters and the horrendously overpowered pay-to-win faction. Sorry, I mean the Undead. Each of the playable factions have their own specific and lore-friendly playstyles. You'll be swarming with the Skaven, shooting with the Witch Hunters, and, well, just screaming mindlessly as the Sisters of Sigmar. If you know these races from their lore background, you'll more or less know how they will play in Mordheim City of the Damned, and now let's start actually looking at the actual gameplay, because it is rather interesting and done fairly well. As soon as you pick your warband, you're then sent to your war camp. Yeah, surprise surprise, and there you'll start off with your faction leader, and now it's time to start recruiting your actual warband. So this works in a very similar way to games of XCOM and stuff like that. You find a character, you like its stats, you like its starting gear, so you hire said character provided you have the possible funds, though of course this is starting a fresh new warband, so you'll have a decent amount of cash to be able to muck around and see what you can get. Don't expect anything too special at the very beginning because yeah, it's the beginning of a game, you're not going to get anything super powered or else yeah, that would be kind of pointless. You start with a relatively large warband, 1 leader, 1 hero which has special abilities, and 3 henchman slots, which are your basic troopers, and you'll be able to use more and more on the battlefield, but you'll have to level up your warband itself. Keep in mind that available DLC will come into play here and will change up your warbands quite a bit. As you can see here, right now I'm working on an undead warband, yet I have access to a Chaos Sorcerer and a Skaven Gunrat, both of which are quite decent. The Gunrat itself is quite overpowered, and if paired with the undead, can be extremely broken. It actually doesn't make sense as to why the undead would be working with the Skaven or even the Chaos Sorcerers. It's one of these things that was just implemented to add in for extra mercenaries. I'm not too keen on this myself, but hey, it still brings in different playstyles. Funny enough, this game does have a campaign. Its successor doesn't really have one in a sense, so how it works here is you'll have a few different missions to go around and capture Warpstone, as Warpstone itself works as a rather valuable currency throughout the whole game. Different missions will appear on the campaign map as you progress through the campaign itself through different days, and each of them will vary drastically. Mousing over them will give you the specifics of more or less what you're going to expect, where one warband could be caught exploring buildings and the other one is tightly around their caravan. It's all got the basis of your caravan as your main location, but then everything can vary as soon as you go into the actual mission. In most cases, when a mission begins, you'll be able to deploy your forces wherever you want, provided they obviously deploy within the specific areas that they can. Depending on the mission type, you'll have different deployments, so sometimes it will be in a wide arc formation, sometimes you can have them pretty closely packed up, which as Skaven, by the way, you'll want to, or you might have them completely scattered. This can be a bit of an issue depending on what faction you play, but it gives you the random aspect of the tabletop, as you really didn't know exactly what map you were going to play if you were playing in a competitive way. If you're playing against NPCs, your opponent will then deploy automatically, and then the actual game begins, where you'll take turns based on an initiative system, again very similar to that of XCOM and other games. Thankfully here I'm playing as a Skaven, so the majority of them tend to go first. Now I get to explore around the map and see where my positioning is going to be, while of course looking for valuables such as warpstone, because that plays very heavily into your campaign. The maps themselves are honestly quite large, it just really depends on the deployment of your enemy, where they might seem very small, but since you're dealing with multi-layer maps, buildings and so on, even the smallest maps can actually seem quite large, and you can get lost trying to explore for them. The map function is very needed. For this particular mission, for example, I'm trying to make my way to a cluster of warpstone, which on the map was listed as green icons, as that obviously is a currency, and I want to get as many of them as possible during the start of my warband. Again, as I'm playing as a Skaven, I'm trying to move in a compact way, keeping all my rats together. Sadly, as I had unfortunately stepped in a trap before, you might have noticed that my leader had to stop, and he's generally my best fighter, so the others are just surrounding him, making sure that he's safe. The turns themselves can take a while depending on how you are trying to actually play, as it might take you a while to think up of a game plan, especially as you're getting used to the map. There are some which are honestly built to be like mazes, so you might get lost, and you're trying to make sure that you're moving in a way that you're not going to get ambushed, or it sometimes takes a while because the AI is taking a while. The AI moves at real time, so it doesn't just randomly teleport to different locations and so on, and the AI can be a little stupid too, which honestly can be a good thing, as the traps which affected me earlier on in this video also affect the enemy AI. So at least it's not all based on anti-player, it's just anyone can get hit by them. You will notice that the objectives are clearly marked at the left-hand side of your screen, though keep in mind, as I said before, warpstone, which is known as stone in this game, I had forgot to mention that before, does not actually count towards the objective in this specific map that I'm playing. It does sometimes, but keep in mind that your main objective in most cases is actually to find weirdstone. Right, let's just jump right into combat. As you may have noticed before, I set one of my Skaven into ambush stance, meaning that if any enemies get too close, then he will automatically charge and attack. And there's unfortunately a witch hunter over here, which seemed a bit too overeager and got caught by my Skaven clan rat. Funny thing, obviously, is that his turn had also ended as he was surprised by said ambush, which, I mean, you should have been prepared for this, but hey. And by a stroke of luck, it was this Skaven's specific turn, so not only did he manage to get to hit once, but now we can try to hit again. So, combat itself is based on a RNG focus here. Despite the fact that I've got 77% to actually hit something, I can miss. And of course that means that the enemy can then try to counterattack if they can, which can be a bit of a problem as these witch hunters do hit quite hard and that Skaven is alone. So the point as the Skaven playthrough is to try and swarm, but let's not go too much into the Skaven stuff as of course this is a general overview of the game. Positioning is extremely important, very much like in the tabletop version of Mordheim or pretty much any other game which follows this similar format. It's important to move your forces around and obviously not get stuck with one specific purpose. For example, as you can see here, I'm moving around different units and preparing them to ambush in different locations, mainly because the moment the AI knows exactly where you are, the rest of them either are very close or are making their way directly to you right now. This is of course what happens when you play against AI. And here's where you'll start to notice some flaws when it comes to enemy AI, as it becomes very one-track minded and will try to focus you despite, well, pretty much any other type of objective. So if the map's very small or your deployment was very close to theirs, it might be a shorter game than most, as they will just try to charge into you and you're going to have to try and fight them off as much as you can. Now let's talk about the little red and blue bars at the top left hand of your screen. This is your morale, where you will always be blue and your enemy will always be red. Morale itself is what keeps your forces going. Depending on what unit you have is depending on what morale they're worth, with of course characters such as leaders or heroes being worth more than basic frontline troops. As your troops start dying or the enemies start dying, morale will go down, and there's a certain threshold that you can see there. The moment that respective threshold is reached, then they will have to start doing what is known as a route test, which is kind of like a dice roll, but you don't get to see it. It's kind of strange as you don't really know exactly what contributing factors come to that route test, barring that the trigger is your morale being lower than 40% of your original morale, and it can fail if you or your your enemy roll higher than their current morale, which obviously again, if you're killing quite a lot, can be very quick. Especially if you're playing a faction which is designed to take out characters very, very quickly. The Skaven themselves or the undead are able to do so, but you need to play them right. So when you complete a mission, win or lose, you'll be greeted with a new screen. This will cycle between all the characters that you've used during the mission and see anything that's happened to them. It could be from gaining experience to losing experience for getting amnesia, even sometimes losing a leg, because yeah, that can happen, or losing an arm, where they could use prosthetics or they'll just be without an arm. It really much depends. There are some benefits to that. For example, a Skaven missing an arm, usually a shield arm, means that they can move a little faster and be better at dodging, but that also means that you are missing out on some armor. After which you'll go through the Warband overview, so there you'll be able to find out any fancy new loot that you've acquired and so on, and then you're back to your camp. Oh yeah, keep in mind, some of your characters can die. This game is unforgiving. Then there's a little bit of administration in the game if you get any new skill points and so on, so you can boost up your characters. Oh yeah, and also keep remembering to pay them, because yeah, very important. Believe me. Other than the campaign features from the actual battles, your main campaign mostly focuses around your smuggler's den. You'll notice here that your primary faction eventually will start sending you missions where you'll need to send in certain amounts of weirdstone. And obviously all that weirdstone is acquired through your missions, where you'll start to see different fragments, shards and clusters, each of them weighing a certain amount of time, because they'll literally ask you for a weight requested. As you start sending in more weirdstone, you'll be able to then get some bonuses as you then start getting your reputation up, which means over there on the right hand side you can see all the different stuff that you can get. Sometimes you can get bonuses towards your training, or you can even start getting access to very high level characters to be able to use in your warband in case any of them die. The secondary factions don't have anything to do with your campaign, however you can then start sending any excess weirdstone you may have, and in any amount, to be able to get more bonuses. The only thing is, don't spend everything on your secondary factions until you know that you have enough to cover your primary. As you can see, at this point I'm in day 3, only having played one mission, and I've already got a request to send £75 of weirdstone in 10 days. It's not too bad, I've only got £6 at the moment, but as you do more and more missions, and those specialized to weirdstone, and of course you don't end your missions too early, you should be able to have as much as you need. There is a shop feature here where you can buy and sell equipment, and sometimes you might get lucky with some rare and even epic items, but in most cases you won't be using this area too much rather than just selling off stuff. It is advised to check this often, as of course you will be able to get some rare items, but really they can get quite expensive and gold can be a bit hard to come by unless you're sending off a lot of weirdstone, and even then you're going to be spending a lot of gold on higher tier units and so on, so you're going to not be using this too much, I'd say. This game does also have some multiplayer functionality, however keep in mind this is a game from 2014 and I've really not seen a lot of available games. It's a shame though, because Exhibition itself is a way to test your warbands and see their capabilities, while Contest plays exactly as you would through your campaign. You're just playing against another player, meaning that your characters can die or get mutilated and so on, and it's a shame because it was quite competitive back in the day. Mordheim is one of those games that I come back to on a regular basis. In fact, when I was streaming on a regular basis on the channel, Mordheim would have a dedicated Mordheim Monday slot, which was always really fun. The game itself is built to mirror the tabletop in a certain sense, meaning that obviously it doesn't really hold your hand, and you learn by doing by most cases. It's not an easy game, and it doesn't really tell you much, where the tutorials will bring you up to speed, but it's better off just starting off a campaign and going through that. It still stands as one of the best Warhammer video games to have ever released, but that's not to say that it doesn't have its problems, and we're going to start discussing that right now, because if you're interested in buying, you need to know these things. First off, this game was released in November 19th, 2015, and has long since been abandoned by its developers. And I'm not actually saying it's been a while, it's just they abandoned it about a year after release. In its base game form, the game is very replayable, and with its DLC, you can get a bit more out of that too, especially with the new factions, but there's nothing else, and it's a shame because Mordheim, the tabletop game, was extremely expansive and had a lot of different possible warband options and so on, which would have been absolutely fantastic here. But the problem is that the developers shelved this game so they could move on to Necromunda Underhive Wars, which is not in its greatest state. It's still not doing well about a year later, but it seems to be progressing, so that's actually a good thing. Let's hope that that doesn't get abandoned too, as there were rumors that they were considering making a second Mordheim, which I would be all for just as long as they keep supporting the damn game. Some of the maps themselves can feel quite repetitive, and I don't think that there's that many different battle maps themselves. However, as there are many different types of loadouts, and you can actually just work around with all the different types of buildings, go through them and so on, you do have access to a lot of different playstyles, so you're okay there. Just because it's repetitive doesn't mean it's a bad thing. In fact, it's probably a good feature here, as of course it does take from the tabletop, as there's only so many different types of battles that you could do, so a little bit of repetition doesn't really hurt. Mordheim is one of those games that I come back to on a regular basis. In fact, when I was streaming on a regular basis on the channel, Mordheim would have a dedicated Mordheim Monday slot, which was always really fun. The game itself is built to mirror the tabletop in a certain sense, meaning that obviously it doesn't really hold your hand, and you learn by doing by most cases. It's not an easy game, and it doesn't really tell you much, where the tutorials will bring you up to speed, but it's better off just starting off a campaign and going through that. It still stands as one of the best Warhammer video games to have ever released, but that's not to say that it doesn't have its problems, and we're going to start discussing that right now, because if you're interested in buying, you need to know these things. First off, this game was released in November 19th, 2015, and has long since been abandoned by its developers. And I'm not actually saying it's been a while, it's just they abandoned it about a year after release. In its base game form, the game is very replayable, and with its DLC, you can get a bit more out of that too, especially with the new factions, but there's nothing else, and it's a shame because Mordheim, the tabletop game, was extremely expansive and had a lot of different possible warband options and so on, which would have been absolutely fantastic here. But the problem is that the developers shelved this game so they could move on to Necromunda Underhive Wars, which is not in its greatest state. It's still not doing well about a year later, but it seems to be progressing, so that's actually a good thing. Let's hope that that doesn't get abandoned too, as there were rumors that they were considering making a second Mordheim, which I would be all for just as long as they keep supporting the damn game. Some of the maps themselves can feel quite repetitive, and I don't think that there's that many different battle maps themselves. However, as there are many different types of loadouts, and you can actually just work around with all the different types of buildings, go through them and so on, you do have access to a lot of different playstyles, so you're okay there. Just because it's repetitive doesn't mean it's a bad thing. In fact, it's probably a good feature here, as of course it does take from the tabletop, as there's only so many different types of battles that you could do, so a little bit of repetition doesn't really hurt. The RNG type of combat can be very frustrating for many players, though if you've played stuff like XCOM, or better, if you've played any of the tabletop games of Warhammer, then you're pretty much okay. Keep in mind that this is very much like Warhammer dice rolling, where you can have amazing ballistic skill or weapon skill, and then still end up rolling a 1, because yeah, it's just that type of thing. The only real big problems with this game is, in some cases, throwables like the Poison Wind Globe over here, you can't really throw it up, which is super weird to me, because if you can throw it down, you should be able to throw it up. It's a throwing weapon after all. And range combat might not be the best, or at least for the player, because the PC AI seems to be able to do okay, though you can see here 85% with an aimed shot, and I still miss, and it's pretty much point blank range. It's just a very frustrating modifier. I'm not too sure what comes into effect here, as yeah, it can still be a dice roll, but if you're being told 85% to succeed, you should get shots more often than not, where in most cases I am directly failing, which is why I avoid range combat most times with this game, though the majority of time I've always focused around hard-hitting builds, and that's pretty much it. Range is really not that good. The AI itself is also kind of stupid, and it will lock itself into combat very easily. Like you can see here, it's trying to come after my vampire, though my zombie, which is right in sight by the way, it's not hidden, has managed to block her and keep her there in that position, as of course when combat starts, you need to stay there unless you disengage, which can have an effect where you can get hit and so on, so it's better just to fight it out. And obviously not everyone has the option to disengage, like for example some undead. Though I will say, barring the AI being kind of stupid, it does make them very hyper aggressive, so the moment they do find you, you're in for a proper fight, which is what you expect from a Warhammer game at the very least, isn't it? I'm not going to talk about the main campaign story missions, as I want that to be a surprise for anyone who's not played this before, but keep in mind that they're not easy. This is a very punishing game. Keep in mind the in-game footage I've been showing you now is the campaign skirmishes, which is those optional missions and the other ones that you go to build up for Weirdstone and so on. The campaign missions, the actual story ones, yeah, they're a league of their own. They get very Dark Souls vibes type of difficulty. But like I said, this stands as one of the best Warhammer games that has ever released, and I honestly just keep going back to it. Now that Total War Warhammer is having a little bit of a content drought, I found myself going back and just enjoying this, having fun with my own personal campaign, and the more I played, the more I realized how absolutely awesome this game is, and I just wanted to really talk about it on the channel and see if it's of interest of you guys, if you want to see content about it, some guides regarding the warbands and so on. This game itself is pretty much for 3 different types of people. First, if you like Warhammer Fantasy, obviously a little bit of a dark, gritty atmosphere, some Skaven, of course, you know, vampire counts and all that type of stuff. It's a Warhammer Fantasy game, and it's one of the very few Warhammer Fantasy games in existence, let alone one of the very, very few ones that are actually any good. Then obviously, if you like XCOM-ish type of playstyle, then this works out very well. It's heavily inspired on it, but with its own flavor. It honestly does quite well, and brings to life the city of Mordheim, one of the most cursed places in the Warhammer Fantasy universe. And finally, if you like a game that doesn't really hold your hand, this is very difficult. There are cases where your characters can die even if they didn't really get hit too hard. It's just the case of them being knocked out and yeah, goodbye arm or goodbye leg or just dying. The game itself is not meant to be easy, and that's actually a good thing. If it's too easy, then it just gets kind of boring. It feels like your hand is being held. Even the other game, the successor to this, Necromunda Underhive Wars, you can just play as Clan Escher, get a bunch of lasguns, and you're laughing pretty much the whole way. So at least with this game, you feel like you're actually having to struggle through, get better equipment, and be incentivized to change out your loadout. The game is still available for around €20 on the Steam page, and I'd honestly say you'd get a decent amount of replayability out of it. The only problem is obviously that you'll have to pay for DLC too if you want some other stuff too, and even then you don't really need all the DLC. The 2 separate warbands, the Undead and the Witch Hunters, are €9.99 each though, and that I'd say is a steep price considering that you got, for €20 you get 4 different warbands. I'd say play the base game before you jump into the DLC, because I'd honestly say that the DLC is very pricey for what it is. You might be able to get it on a sale though, which is probably better than anything else, as it is worth it. It's just not worth paying that price for a singular warband, which you may or may not like. Though that being said, if you want easy mode, and this is probably the only way you'll get a proper easy mode, it would be with the Undead. But yeah, what do you guys think about this type of video? It's more like a stronger deep dive into different Warhammer games. I was thinking about doing something like this just to have a little bit of fun and try something new on the channel. Hopefully you guys do enjoy this, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and let's start a bit of a discussion. If you are picking this game up, let me know how your campaigns are going, because it's always fun to feel other people's misery. I'm just going to be honest about that. But with that, my friends, we've come to the end of our video. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, might I suggest giving the video a like, or even subscribing to the channel, as it really does help us out. In the description section below are various links to different social media platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, and Discord. Also in the description section is an affiliate link with Element Games, where you could buy loads of hobby-based products, not just Warhammer, for 10 to 25% off. Making a purchase using that link and also our special code, which is also in the description, supports the channel at no extra cost to you, which we think is rather cool. A big thank you to our patrons. Your support means the world to us. It's amazing that people want to help a small channel like us grow and get to a higher level of content. A big thank you to Gibraltar LUSC, Ryan Bertsche, Andrew Prince, and Okro for subscribing to us at our fame level. You guys are super cool. And a big thank you to Edward Yule, VS Vasan, Aaron Whitman, and Shaggy for subscribing to us at our king level. Honestly, we can't thank you all enough. And lastly, a big thank you to all of you for liking, sharing, and commenting on these videos. Honestly, it's because of you guys that the channel's been growing at such a great pace lately, so we can't thank you all enough. But with that, my friends, thank you so much for watching once again, and we shall see you all again very, very soon. Have a good day.